All right. Well, thank you. So first of all, Rick, thank you so much. Thanks to your Citizens Bank colleagues for making this happen. Really appreciate it. A big thank you to our friend Ron Insana. I really appreciate all that he said, but particularly what he was talking about organs and what's there as Terry. I'm sorry, I had to go to the aftermarket to get my kidney, so I'm not an OEM specimen anymore. I got some aftermarket parts in me, but I really appreciated that. Of course, Devin Skillion, always great to work with Devin, so thank you so much, Devin. I also want to thank George Corona, the recently retired CEO of Kelly Services, who was our keynote for our education event, which I think half of you were at earlier this morning. So thank you all for everything that you've done for us. So now it's time to get into the regional data. Devin and Ron gave you kind of a global and national view. Now it's the time to see what we're looking at here in our region. Now this report, and many of you are familiar with it, tracks our socioeconomic progress over time, a 5-year period of time and a year over year. It also compares us to 9 competing regions here in the United States. And it's because that we are engaged in a battle between regions, not just nationally, but globally. And since we are a region, it is really important that we are working together. And I'm pleased that our data and research efforts going forward are going to be coordinated with the City of Detroit, and I'm very glad that Dave Masseron is here today from the Mayor's office, because he and his team at the city are working with the University Economic Analysis Partnership, MSU, U of M, and Wayne State, for their data research, and we're going to make sure that we're all coordinated. And we also look forward to working with the new Detroit Regional Partnership to ensure that all of our data is the same, so all of our leaders are working off of a common set of metrics, and we're being very coordinated through the various organizations that are so important to our region going forward. And speaking of data, the data that we use, that other organizations use, is only as good as the data that is collected. And that is why the Detroit Regional Chamber is so pleased to be working with Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Mayor Mike Duggan to ensure that the census count in 2020 is the best that it can be. Frankly, 10 years ago, this state, this region, this city didn't do a very good job at the census. And that means a lot of people in Michigan and our region did not get counted. And that has a real impact on Michigan in terms of its support from the federal government, in terms of congressional districting, the number of districts representatives that we have in Congress. All of these things are hugely important, and we're going to be working very hard to ensure that the 2020 census in Michigan and the region is the best ever. At your tables, you will find a flyer about things that you can do as a business leader in this region to promote the census with your employees, and particularly with your employees that may live in hard-to-reach areas or are part of hard-to-reach populations. This is incredibly important. And if you don't have one at your table at the chamber booth on your way out, you can get some more information. And this is something you're going to be hearing a lot more of from the Detroit Regional Chamber going forward. Now, when we think about our region and we think about it over a period of time, we don't have to think that far back when every headline about our state and our city was not a positive one. But those days are long over. Today, a decade after the Great Recession and 5 years after the municipal bankruptcy of the city of Detroit, the national buzz about this city and this state continues to be overwhelmingly positive. And that shows that the resurgence of Michigan and Detroit was not a flash in the pan. This is enduring. And the data that we're about to present bolsters that. When we review this data, let's remember the progress that we have made. Because not all of the data is going to be exactly what we want it to be, but let's not forget how far we have come. So when we think about what does good look like, what does success look like, I think it comes down to 3 summary points in this year's State of the Region report. First of all, we are making progress. We're making substantial progress. Thanks to our regional leaders, Governor Snyder and Whitmer, our business leadership in this state and region, the philanthropic community, we have come an incredible way. If we could think back to 2008, 2009, if we would have predicted that we would be where we are today, people would have said, no way. But we have done it. Second summary point, the long-standing areas of concern for this region continue to be our long-standing areas of concern. We need to address these long-standing challenges in our region. And this primarily centers around the people in our community who have not enjoyed the economic prosperity that everyone in this room has. And our region will not be successful. Our region will not reach its potential until we achieve that goal. That is a business imperative, it is a political imperative, and it is a moral imperative that we make that happen. And thirdly, when you look at the data, yes, you are going to see that we are on a continued upward trajectory. That's good news. But we are experiencing a little bit of a slowdown. Compared to our peer group across the region and compared to some of the national averages, there are more and more metrics where we're not quite doing as well as we used to. Still positive, but still not quite doing as well as we used to. In terms of our metrics at the Detroit Regional Chamber, we try to keep in mind that our job is not just to represent business interests. Our job is to ensure, working with other organizations, working with our political leadership, working with our philanthropic community, that our entire region rises. Because if our entire region doesn't rise, then it's hard for employers to attract employees. It's hard for employers to have a market to sell to. So we know we need to be holistic in our approach. And that's why our regional scorecard at the Detroit Regional Chamber focuses around people. It focuses around community. It focuses around talent. It focuses around global connectivity. And it focuses around continuing our leadership in next generation mobility. Because our overall goal, not just as an organization at the Detroit Regional Chamber, but our overall goal as a region needs to be that our region is educated, employed, and healthy, and able to compete and win in the 21st century global marketplace. Now, just like no part of our region exists in a bubble, Michigan and Detroit don't exist in a bubble. We are linked to the national environment. And as you heard from Ron and Devin, the national policies regarding trade are impacting this region. And this, coupled with a general unease or a general uncertainty regarding the political environment in Washington, is having the impact of slowing economic growth nationally, as Ron alluded to, but particularly here at home in Detroit and Michigan. Give you a national example. The 2019 Purchasing Managers Index for September was 47.8%. Now, that number may not mean much to you, but it is the lowest number it has been since 2009. That is not a good benchmark. Now, on the contrary side, consumer confidence remains strong, and that's critical because 70% of our economy is based on consumer spending. And you all, and everyone else just like you across the country, you guys have your wallets open. But when you look at some of the national perspectives, we are seeing a slowdown. This was the number that I think Ron and Devin talked a little bit about, but we are seeing a business investment drop, 3% in Q3. We're seeing an over 7% decrease in U.S. exports to China, and numerous surveys of national CEOs and CFOs indicate a cautious look at 2020 and 2021. Not negative, but certainly less robust than it has been in recent years. Looking at our region, foreign direct investment saw a dramatic drop in this most recent year where data is available. We went from $2.5 billion in foreign direct investment into our region to $1 billion in the most recent year available. And exports from this region tell a similar story. Our regional businesses here in Detroit exported over 3% less than they did in the prior year. Now, this is important because Michigan is a top 10 exporting state. We are a global powerhouse. And the Detroit region is the 6th largest exporting region in the nation. So there is a link between what's happening nationally and what's happening here. And as Ron and Devin talked about, exports were up nationally 7.7%, but down in Michigan over 3%. And this is a good example of how national policy is impacting us here at home. So as we dive into some of the core figures in the report that you have at your seats, let's start with gross domestic product. 5-year growth rate, Michigan ranks 5th in our peer group. And last year, we did fall slightly behind the national average. So it's still a positive number, but less than the national average. Now, this number is about to be updated by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So in a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, whenever that number comes out, we will update this report and make it available to you as soon as that data is available. Private sector job growth is another positive story for us in this region. Our region ranks 4th in our peer group over both the 1-year and 5-year time frames. And we have gained 318,000 new private sector jobs since the Great Recession. And if that number doesn't mean anything to you, it's essentially the same number that Boston and Seattle have. So we're in very good company when it comes to private sector job growth in the Detroit region. Now, this slide may look familiar to you, especially that portion at the very left end. 2009, our unemployment rate in the region was 16.7%. Now, that number was scary enough on its own, but it was 7% above the national average. So no matter how bad the nation was, we were way worse than that. But look at the story today. We have not only lowered dramatically our unemployment rate to 5.3, we are now within 1%, or roughly 1%, of the national average. So we've made tremendous progress. Now, you might be noticing that there's a little tick up here, that our unemployment rate went up a little bit. I wouldn't fret over that all that much. You as employers know that it is essentially a full labor market out there, and that slight uptick that you're seeing in the region could very well be attributable to more entrants coming into the labor market who previously were sitting idle. Median household income, another positive story. The Detroit region saw gains in both 1-year over 5-year. The 1-year growth, 3.6%. That surpassed the nation by a significant amount, with the nation at 2.7%. So we're roughly a percentage above in the 1-year growth for median household income. That's an incredibly important number. And the 5-year growth, we are up 15.5%, which ranks us 5th in our peer group. Home values. This is probably something you're all paying attention to. The Detroit region's home values continue to outpace the region. We have grown 32.2% over the last 5 years. Now, the 1-year rate of home value increase was 5.1%, which is a great solid number. But the national rate over 1 year was 5.6%. And what this is probably telling us that the days of explosive home growth that took place a few years ago in Michigan are likely over. But if we're settling in at roughly a national rate, that's still a very strong place for us to be. We've talked about our leadership as a state and as a region in next generation mobility, and we are a powerhouse, and we should all be very proud, and we should all be tending to this very important garden that is next generation mobility. There are 21 original equipment manufacturers, either headquarters or tech centers, in this region, and 96 of the top 100 Tier 1 suppliers are headquartered right here in the state of Michigan. And in a first-of-its-kind study commissioned by our Mich Auto program, we were able to document and then report that the automobility sector in Michigan contributes $225 billion with a B to our Michigan economy. That's a huge impact, and it's the first time it's ever been documented. We also lead the nation in connected and autonomous vehicle legislation, allowing more testing and deployment of next-generation technologies here in the state. And Michigan is the #1 state in the nation for U.S. Department of Transportation funded connected vehicle programs. Now, the news isn't all rosy, so let's talk about some areas where we need to do better. Many of you attended the State of the Region event with George Corona earlier this morning, and where we released a whole deep dive on the state of our education, both in the region and in the city of Detroit. You will find copies of that at your tables as well, and if there's none available, again, the chamber booth on your way out would be happy to provide you one. So, good news and bad news. Let's talk about educational attainment. George Corona said this morning that there is a war for talent, and the war is over. Talent won. Employers lost. That tells you the dynamic of where we are and what we need to be able to do to ensure that our region is able to succeed, both at an individual level, a community level, and at a corporate level. George also said that the greatest impediment to global growth is access to talent. And if we're able to lead on talent in this region, we will lead in other sectors as well. But when it comes to educational attainment in our region, the good news is that we increased slightly over last year. Our educational attainment rate, which includes people with a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, stands at 40.7%. The year prior is 40.3%, so a slight uptick. Good news, let's celebrate a win when we can. The bad news is that we are still below the national average, and in our peer group, we're dead last. Poverty rate. Now, this is a city of Detroit only number. The good news is that the poverty rate in the city of Detroit has continued to decline. And over the last several years, it has declined precipitously. And that is largely thanks to the heroic efforts of Mike Duggan and his team. The bad news is that compared to the national rate of 13%, 33.3% means that we all have a lot of work to do to hammer away at that poverty rate in the city of Detroit and across the state. Labor force participation. We rank last in our peer group, and we're below the national average. Unemployment rate, 5.3, great number for us, so much better than where we were, but it is still above the national rate. Population growth. Here's some good news. We all know that over the years, a tremendous amount of population has been lost, not just from the city of Detroit, not just from the region, but the state of Michigan as a whole. The good news is that that tide has turned. We are now seeing population growth in the region. Now, it's only 0.1%. It's not a big number, but it's better than a negative number. Community well-being is another one. When I said our goal needs to be, employed and healthy, this is the healthy part. According to the Gallup Health Community Well-Being Index, we now rank 117 out of 156. Now, that may not sound like a good place to be, and obviously, frankly, we can do a heck of a lot better. But compared to the last Gallup Well-Being Index, we have made actually significant progress. We are now in the 3rd quartile of that survey, where we were close to the bottom of the 4th quartile last time around. So, as we look forward to 2020, what do we need to keep in mind? One, that 6 years of this State of the Region data shows meaningful gains and much for us to celebrate. But gains, both year over year and over time, are beginning to slow, both at the national level and in some cases, particularly here in our corner of the world. Secondly, long-standing challenges need to be addressed. They are persistent, they are hard, and it's going to take all of us working together to address these persistent challenges, because until we do that, we will not succeed. Government at all levels can be an incredible enabler, and we have been blessed that we have had so much positive government leadership at the city level, at the county level, at the state level for several years now. But we also know that government can be a detriment if not right, and that's something we are all responsible for. Finally, our region needs a comprehensive and collaborative policy plan to chart the next decade. We have had a tremendous decade of growth in our area, but what about the next decade? The challenges in the next decade might actually be more complicated than the decade that just passed. And if we want to end in 2030 in an even better position than we are as we enter 2020, we need to be proactive. So I'm very pleased today to announce a new initiative by the Detroit Regional Chamber. We're launching today the Michigan 2030 Plan. The Michigan 2030 Plan is our long-term vision and policy roadmap that'll point our region and our state towards the critical steps we need to take in the near term to ensure we emerge from this upcoming decade as an even stronger global leader and in a position where more of our citizens are participating in the prosperity that they deserve to be a part of. I'm pleased that we're beginning this journey with some great chamber member companies already by our side, including DTE Energy, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Deloitte, and AECom. Obviously, we're going to want more of you to help us, and with this announcement today, we're anxious to tell you more. Our top-rated Lansing-based government affairs team has created the following pillars in which we are going to build our policy agenda around. One is to ensure our region and state is known for having the best talent in the country. Secondly, we want to maintain and expand on our growth-oriented business climate. We made tremendous progress in the last several years in improving Michigan and Detroit's business climate. Let's not go back on that. Let's expand on that. Thirdly, let's ensure that we own the next generation of mobility, just the way we owned the first century of mobility. It's ours for the taking, but it's going to take effort and it's going to take collaboration. Fourth, let's ensure that we have forward-looking smart infrastructure to enable citizens and companies to be globally competitive for the long term. And finally, let's ensure we have efficient and productive government and a healthy democracy. None of this happens in a vacuum. We need to do all this together. And we are looking forward to working with our chamber member businesses, policy experts, research advisors, and other like-minded organizations, not just in the region, but across the state, to build this agenda. Because we don't want to build a Michigan 2030 agenda that works just for the Detroit region. We want to build an agenda that is proactive, that works for the entire state. So, we've already started work on this, thanks to the Chamber's Foundation Board of Directors. But in order for this to be a roadmap that is fully bought into and supported, we're going to need you. So I'm asking all of you to ensure that you reach out to the Chamber staff if you want to get more engaged in watching your inboxes to ensure that you have the latest information regarding what's next with our 2030 plan. So, with that, I want to thank all of you for being here. I also want to thank our investors. We have 180 investors that help enable the Chamber to do things like State of the Region and our economic development portfolio. We're especially grateful to our lead partners and investors, including the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, DTE Energy, the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, and our longtime friends at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Thanks again to our friends Ron Insana, Devin Skillion, George Corona, but most of all, thank you all for spending your valuable time with us. We're honored that you would spend so much time with us today. Thank you for being here. Have an awesome rest of your day, and happy holidays.